Right. Good. Hello, everyone. I'm Balogun Steven, a member of this year's organizing committee. We welcome you all to this the first session on building the art community. Thank you for joining us today. We hope that, like you are excited to learn from our speakers. For today, we have four presentations. The first presentation will be taken by Guilherme Disachi. He's going to be telling us about how the AstraZeneca team has used the R to within the AstraZeneca and what the lessons that has been learned so far. So, Guilherme, would you want to just go ahead and share your screen now? You have 15 minutes for this. And to our participants, please feel free to use the chat box. Put your questions within the chat box. Uh, After the presentations, we're going to have some time for the presenters to be able to respond to your questions. And hopefully, the last 10 to 15 minutes, we're also going to come back and take any question we're not able to address during the particular session. Over to you, Guilherme Desachi.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stefan, for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here today. So my name is Guillaume. I work as a statistician at AstraZeneca, and I also lead the community of our users at AstraZeneca. So before we get started, I want to reflect on the journey of the pharmaceutical industry in the past 10 or so years. So 10 or so years ago, I think there was very much a divide. And basically, when you were joining the industry, you basically had to choose between SAS and R. And you had to choose your favorite language. And there was pretty much a fight. And it was like, which one is the best? Which one should we be using? But what I very much like is the journey we've gone through, what we have gone through in the past 10 years. And the way I see it today is that there is very much an interaction between SAS and R. And now one doesn't have to choose camp. One doesn't have to choose whether it's SAS or R, but it can very much be SAS and R for different uses, obviously. But I'm very happy to see this, to see the progress we've made in the past 10 or so years. Now, having this in mind, at AstraZeneca, in the pharmaceutical industry, there are many profiles of our users. So obviously, there's the usual suspects, the programmers, the statisticians, the data scientists. But we also have got medical directors. We also have got scientists. We also have got translational scientists that actually use R in their day-to-day job and take advantage of it. And I think this is very important to keep in mind, the diversity of the profile of our users within our organization. Now, having this in mind, a year or so ago, we decided to get together with a few collaborators at AstraZeneca and to kick off a community of our users within the organization. And this community of our users, it is called Rdac. And in the very early days, when we brainstormed, we were like, okay, maybe we could do something like a Tidy Tuesday. Or maybe we could do a weekly blog post. Or maybe we could do an internal R conference. So at the beginning, it kind of felt like crazy ideas. And we're like, yeah, let's jot down some ideas and let's see where it goes. But I think one of the big achievements of this community of our users in 2022 was the very first AstraZeneca R conference. And when we designed this conference, the idea that we had was to basically meet the needs of the diverse set of our users within the organization. So it was obviously a challenge to cater to their needs, to meet their needs. But I think we actually met the expectations. And what I'm very happy about is when I look at this map, which is the map of the people who joined this conference, this internal conference, actually we had more than 500 collaborators, more than 500 participants joining from 22 countries. So not only did we have a diverse set of participants in terms of background, in terms of functions, but we also had a diverse set of participants with people joining from all over the world. So I was very happy to see this. Now, to give you a bit of an overview of what we did during this conference. So this conference was fully virtual. It lasted 1/2 day. In total, we generated more than 10 hours of content related to R. We had 30 speakers, and we had 29 posters coming from close to 100 authors. And we were very fortunate to have Max Kuhn from our studio as a keynote speaker. And he gave a really brilliant talk about tidy models. So we felt very fortunate to have him as part of this very first AstraZeneca R conference. Now, going back to the community of our users at AstraZeneca, what was key to us and what is still key to us is to keep in mind the diversity of the profiles, the diversity of the R users. So what I'm going to be talking about after are ongoing initiatives as part of the RDAISY community. So this is very much a work in progress. These are the ongoing initiatives. Some of these initiatives might evolve. There might be some new initiatives coming up, but that's the current state of the community. So one initiative, which is led by Gustav Söderström, is called the Lunch and Learn. So the whole idea is to present one topic related to R in the form of a 30-minute presentation. And this is actually happening the first week of each month. And having inclusion and diversity in mind, we actually alternate between Europe and US in terms of time zones. And this event is promoted and broadcasted via our internal social network. So that's our first initiative, the Lunch and Learns. A second initiative, which we branded as AZ Tidy Tuesday, is basically bringing home an initiative which exists in the external world. So I'm not going to explain you what is Tidy Tuesday, because you probably heard about it. But basically, AZ Tidy Tuesday is a Tidy Tuesday for AstraZeneca collaborators. So it's one topic, one data set, one graph. And what we are trying to do with AZ Tidy Tuesday is basically we identify a data set of interest. And by data set of interest, what we are trying to do is to identify a data set which is close to either one of our 5 values or close to something currently happening in the organization or externally. And this happens a bit less frequently than the regular Tidy Tuesday because it happens the second Tuesday of each month. So it's once a month. And here you can see a few topics that we tackled. So we talked about plastic, we talked about pride, we talked about Moore's law, we talked about various diversity of topic. So, and this initiative is again promoted and broadcasted via our social network, our internal social network, the second Tuesday of each month. And about 2.5 weeks after, we actually promote a featured contributor. And the featured contributor is selected by the steering committee of RDAISY. And that's how we choose the featured contributor. So that's the second initiative, AZ Tidy Tuesday. The third initiative, which is led by Daniel Schiff, is called the R function of the month. So in here, the idea is basically to describe one R function in the form of one blog post. And this happens the third week of each month. And as you can see, it's again promoted via our internal social network. And for example, in this one, Daniel talked about pivot longer and pivot wider. And if you've not tried these functions yet, I strongly encourage you to try them out because I think they are game changers in comparison to gather and spread. And last but not least, there is an initiative called the 10 to 1s. It is led by Tom Marlowe, and it is called the 10 to 1s. Tom branded it as the 10 to 1s because basically Tom is asking 10 questions to one R user. And this is happening the last week of each month. And the form of this initiative is basically via a snapshot. And these are the questions that are asked to one given R user within the organization. So the questions are the exact same every single time. And I think that's what is very interesting because you can see the variety of answers from one R user to another. And what I find also very interesting is that it meets the needs of everyone in the sense that you've got really great tips and tricks, whether you're a beginner or whether you're a more advanced user. So that's what I really like about this initiative. And it's also very interesting to see what was the journey of advanced R users. What was their journey? What brought them up to this point, basically. So that's what is ongoing for RDAZ. Now, I think there are two things I'm very proud of today. The first thing is the fact that we've got a diversity of initiatives. And the diversity of initiatives helps meeting the needs of the diversity of profile users. That's one thing. The second thing that I'm proud of is basically the cadence of these initiatives, because every single week of the month, there is a different initiative. And if we step back a tiny bit, in real life, we've got this cadence. Let's say we go rock climbing every Tuesday. Let's say we go soccer playing every Thursday. Then every single week we know what's going to be happening, and whether it is in a real life community or whether it is in a virtual community, when you read about communities, the cadence is actually very important. So that's what we're trying to implement in the RDAZ community, and that's why we want to have this rhythm, basically this cadence. And as I briefly alluded to, all our communications are done via the Astrazeneca internal social media. Now, if you don't have any internal social media, you can still do something similar because you could be using a Teams channel or you could be using a Slack channel to do all your communications about your community. Now, I was saying what I was proud of are the four ongoing initiatives. What I'm also proud of is to have looked at the evolution of the number of members in the RDAZ workplace group. So workplace is our internal social media. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not about the numbers. It's not about tracking the numbers. It's not about tracking how many members we have in this workplace group. However, I still think that even if it's not about the numbers, the trend that we see in here is a good indicator of the interest in our organization. And I think that what we have done in the past year, so be it AZ Tidy Tuesday, be it the function of the month, be it the Astrazeneca R conference, be it the Lunch and Learn, or the 10 to 1, I think these all helps driving the momentum and driving the interest for R at Astrazeneca. Now, as I was saying, these are the ongoing initiatives, but that's not it, because we will have many more cool things in the future. We are currently organizing workshops with our studio, jointly with our studio, and the first one is going to be in September. It's going to be an internal workshop. And then we're also organizing some virtual RDAZ random encounters, again, to build this community, to build this sense of belonging. We want to encourage people to basically discuss and to basically get to know each other. Now you might be asking, okay, but why are you doing all of this, and is this one single initiative? Well, actually, RDAZ is one of 5 data science communities, and Vera Hazelwood is our community's guru at AstraZeneca, and so we've got 5 of them. One is about software development for AI, one is about NLP, one is about responsible AI, one is about RDAZ, and one is about imaging. But you might be thinking, okay, but why are you doing this? Actually, the reason why we think it is important to have these communities is because, first of all, it enables the workforce. Second of all, it ensures a better interconnection. And finally, we are convinced that it ensures a greater retention of talents. So that's why we think all of these communities are so important for our organization. Now, I'm not gonna lie, building a vibrant community takes a whole lot of time. It takes a whole lot of investment, but I think it is very much worth it, because the feedback that we got from the Astrazeneca R conference in February 2022 were over the roof. Everyone was ecstatic about it. Everyone was very happy that we organized this very first conference. And the feedback that we got about the different initiatives that are ongoing is mesmerizing. And I think we're doing a good thing here. So before I wrap up, I want to thank everyone that has been involved in building this community. As I said, it was a lot of work. It is still a lot of work, but I think we're doing something good, something nice, and this is thanks to all of the people mentioned on this slide. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take questions either now or at the end of the session. Thank you.
Excellent presentation, Graham. Thank you. You already have three questions in the question and answer. I think you might want to look at them, and I hope that at the end of the presentation, we'll have time to be able to ask some of them live. So I'm going to go ahead and invite the second speaker. She is going to be talking about the R consortium by the R consortium R submission pilot 1 to FDA. So I invite Ning Leng for our presentation. Ning, kindly share your screen.
Thank you very much. I hope you can see my slide now.
Yeah, we can. Please go ahead.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Thanks everyone for joining today's session. So I will be talking about a pilot submission to FDA on clinical trial analysis. And my name is Ning, and I'm from Roche Genentech. I'm a people product lead from the product development data science team. And this presentation is on behalf of the R Consortium R Submission Working Group, which is a working group under the nonprofit organization R Consortium. Yeah, so just want to start with a little bit background. As many of you may know that before a treatment getting approved to the market, a number of clinical trials need to be performed. And also those clinical trial data and result and interpretation need to be submitted to the health authority, such as FDA, for review. Yeah, so basically the FDA reviewers, including clinical reviewers, statistical reviewers, etc., they will review the data analysis reports, the data set, and also the software programs. And in addition to that, sometimes or most of the times, the health authority reviewers will also reproduce the key analysis results to ensure a product's efficacy and safety. That include review of the submitted data, review of the code, and also many times independent programming to reproduce the results. And as you may know that in the past few years, the proprietary software has been widely used in this industry, partially because people think using proprietary software may ensure the reproducibility and also the quality of the codes. But in recent years, like as Guilin just mentioned, that there is a very strong interest in the industry where people want to start adopting open source software in this space as well. Therefore, about 2 years ago, a group of us from different companies came together and created this working group under the nonprofit organization R Consortium. So in this working group, we are getting together, trying to conduct pilots and also providing maybe good practice white papers to improve the usage of open source language in this regulatory setting. Yeah, so what are the special things about using open source language in those regulatory submissions? What are the challenges? The first challenge is definitely around reproducibility. As we know that in the clinical trial space, every single decision will be impacting a patient's life. So reproducibility is a very, very important fact over here. Yeah, so when using open source software, we know that there are so many packages out there, and sometimes like a newer version of a package may perform a little bit differently than the older version of the package. Therefore, we really need to ensure that our reviewer from our health authority have access to the exact version of a package that the submitter used. And also, like we noticed that, like for some of the reviewers, they may not have the access to container technology. Therefore, like this, like kind of reproducibility practice will be more relying on kind of like a good documentation on package versions, etc. And then another challenge in this space is that as we're working on patient data, we're working on products that are not on market yet. Sometimes we need to submit our package with some private information. So those are our packages that cannot be put in public domain yet before the approval. So there is a technical challenge from the FDA e-submission gateway part. So basically, for security reasons, the FDA e-submission gateway doesn't allow us to submit a compressed file, such as rpackage.tar.gz or .zip. Therefore, we need to explore other workarounds to turn the compressed R packages into a different format. So in our pilot, we actually use a R package developed by Merck called Package Lite to turn the compressed package file into a giant TXT file. And lastly, like for the FDA submission, they have, or any other health authority submission, they have a very well-defined file structure. And you can imagine there are tons of files need to be submitted for a clinical trial. And then where to put certain information about R or about a open source language, such as package version, etc. That is also something we want to explore. We want to make sure that we put certain information into this file structure while ensuring the reviewers can access those information easily. Therefore, last year, the working group designed a submission pilot 1, and in collaboration with FDA, we want to test out some workarounds around the challenges I mentioned in the last slide. So in this pilot 1, from a submitter point of view, we want to try submitting a proprietary R package like via the e-submission gateway of FDA. As mentioned, that we want to test whether we can use Package Lite to turn those compressed file into a giant TXT file and then submit that through FDA gateway. And we also want to try we also want to explore that where to put certain information into the FDA reviewer's guide to make sure that the FDA reviewers can access those information easily. And in this pilot, we also want to test that, like from FDA reviewer perspective, from FDA staff perspective, whether they can retrieve the submitted information, they can reconstruct the submitted proprietary package using the Package Lite, and also whether they can retrieve the same version of open source packages we used. And lastly, we want to, from this process, we want to learn from the FDA staff whether there's anything we can improve in terms of the submission process or in terms of where we put certain information, etc. So so basically for this pilot, it was a very small submission to show the feasibility of the workarounds. We didn't generate new data. We used existing simulated data from an earlier open pilot. And also we only included 4 outputs in this pilot. The pilot 1 went very smoothly, and we got a very strong support from our FDA collaborators over there. So I think we only been through like 2 iterations of like improvement. So in March this year, you see that like we received this final response letter from FDA, and we're very happy to see that like they were able to receive our submission package. They were able to reconstruct the proprietary R package. They were able to install and load open source packages, and also they were able to reproduce the analysis code we provided, and they were able to do independent programming and regenerate the numbers like by their programming. All the information can be found in this GitHub repository. So if you are interested, please feel free to check out this GitHub repository. In terms of next steps, right now the working group is working on a pilot tool in collaboration with FDA. In this pilot, we want to test out whether we can submit a Shiny app to FDA and for them to deploy on their system or on their laptop. And also we're at the same time we're exploring pilot 1 extensions. For example, conducting the same pilot with other health authorities, including Japan, PMDA, etc. So if you want to learn more about our working group, you can visit our webpage on github.io. All the materials are open to public. All the meeting minutes are open to the public. And also, if anyone wants to join the working group, just feel free to email our consortium info email address over there. We welcome anyone to join the working group. Of course, we're not the only working group in this space trying to improving the usage of open source language in regulatory setting. Just want to highlight several more working groups, across industry working groups out there. The first one is our validation hub. As the name indicates, it is working on like tools and guidelines on how to validate our packages. And the second one is our tables for regulatory reporting. It is trying to provide guidance and also tools for easier generation of tables fulfilling regulatory requirements. And the last one is a PharmaWorks, which is a very large cross-industry collaboration where people came together to co-create tools for regulatory reporting, such as tools for item generation, tools for output generation, tools for data check, etc. And lastly, I just want to give a heads up onto, if you're interested in learning more in this space, I just want to give a heads up on 2 upcoming events. The first one is a seminar in our adoption series. This event will be announced this week. Yeah, so we're very honored to have 3 FDA staff joining us on July 13th, Wednesday, talking about their experience of using R in their regulatory review of clinical trial data. And also in this year, the R in Pharma conference will be held in November again virtually. And this is a very nice conference, kind of like gathering people from the pharma space together, talking about their experience of using R. And I believe it is for abstract right now, and the deadline will be June 30th. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, great presentation, Ing. Thank you so much. Currently, we don't really have any question for you from any of our participants, but I have one here, so I'm just going to go ahead and ask you my question since we still have a few more minutes. Basically, I see that from your presentation, it does seem that maybe the FDA is also really using R. And my question is, what would you say is the acceptance and the usage of R within the FDA? Maybe what do you think has motivated this? Why do you think the community is actually into R? It would be nice if you can just tell us your thoughts around this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so definitely, I think we see that FDA reviewers are also using R. There are SaaS users in FDA reviewer community as well, but there are also people who start to use R. And we definitely see more and more presentations from the FDA side, kind of like starting using R. And in terms of why people are shifting to open source language, I think a big reason is that like kind of the talents, like the people out of school are learning open source languages, like rather than proprietary languages in their school. So like for people like who came with R knowledge or Python knowledge, they intend to use like the language they know in their daily work. So I see that that's one reason driving both the maybe health authority and also the industry people moving toward open source language.
Right, thank you. Just a reminder to our participants, please feel free to use the Q&A box to ask questions. And I think we have a few more for you, Ning, but we are going to be coming back to this towards the end of this presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and invite our next speaker. The next session will be co-presented by Njoki Lucy and Shelmit Kariki. They're going to be talking to us on building an R-related community during the COVID-19 pandemic. Over to you, Lucy and Shelmit.
Okay, thank you so much, Stephen, and thank you as well for all participants for joining us. Yeah, thank you, Shell, for sharing the screen. Okay, so I'll start. So we are truly grateful for this opportunity to talk about our Ladies chapter. My name is Njoki Njuki. I currently work as a research assistant, stroke data scientist at the University of Manchester, the City for Epidemiology versus Arthritis. I'm also pursuing my master's in statistics and data science, particularly the biostatistics track at Hasselt University. Shall, please do introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Njoki. Am I still audible?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Shell. I'm currently working as a data analytics consultant for the World Bank, and I am glad to be telling you the story of how our chapter came to be, and we are really hoping that our story encourages anyone who wants to start a chapter in their city. So for those who may not be aware, Nairobi is the capital city of Kenya, and two things about Nairobi and Kenya in general. One, Nairobi National Park is the only national park that
Sorry,
exists
Shell,
within
just to interrupt you, please hide the notification bar. We can see it. Yes, thank you.
Okay. So Nairobi National Park is the only national park that exists within a capital city, and two, Kenya is home to the world's fastest distance runners. But anyway, how did we meet? On June 15th, 2019, Nairobi R was being launched, and that is the same week that Maggie was an Our Ladies curator, and she attended our event. And Nairobi R was a chapter we started with three amazing gents to spread the gospel of R in the city. And during that launch, we had a chat with her about the possibility of having our own chapter here in Nairobi. And in July, I attended USAR 2019, where I met and interacted with several Our Ladies. I came back home very eager to start a chapter. In August of the same year, Maggie, Faith, and I were part of those invited to a data science workshop by the National Commission for Science, Technology, and Innovation. And during the event, I met Faith, who was presenting some awesome shiny apps that they had built at work. We had a chat with her about R and starting a community here in Kenya. In the same year, Maggie Motiso, who is one of the Nairobi ARC organizers, and Njoki were actively participating in Tidy Tuesday, and we got to talk with Njoki in the DMs, but we physically met during one of the Nairobi Women in Machine Learning events here in Nairobi, and that was at the beginning of 2020. And so I felt we were a strong team to start a chapter, and so I reached out to each of them privately, and we decided to open a WhatsApp group and discuss how this chapter will be organized. But then COVID hit, and the first case in Kenya was reported in March 2020. So we had to re-strategize. But then one of the major challenges we faced with Nairobi R was getting a physical venue. So we started toying with the idea of having virtual meetups, since we knew Our Ladies leadership could provide us with a Zoom account. And so the four of us then decided to have our first virtual call. And during this call, we got to introduce ourselves and talk about why we were interested in leading the chapter. We also joined the Our Ladies Slack workspace, though some of us were part of it already. We also talked about division of roles, that is, who was to be responsible for social media and uploading the posters, who was to create the posters, who will source for speakers, who will be the overall chair. And this is what we settled for. So Njoki will be the overall chair, and the rest of us will be co-organizers. Faith was to source for speakers, Maggie will create the posters and work on social media. I will do a little bit of everything, and Njoki will handle social media, including posting videos to YouTube and communicating with participants. Over to you, Njoki.
Okay, thank you. So we also needed to look for mentors, that is people in other cities who had already been organizing the Our Ladies meetups. And we decided to reach out to Vebashini, to have a call with and to ask for advice as to how we can go about starting our chapter. So during that particular call, Vebash talked to us about, for example, collaboration with between our ladies and the our user group in the city. She also did mention about, so in regarding to the collaboration, she mentioned about the joint events they had and the watch parties that they have been holding at the beginning, at the end of the year. So that got us interested into collaborating with other chapters as well. Additionally, she spoke about the division of roles, which is a key concept in organizing of the chapter. And like Shelmith has mentioned, we were able to divide the roles among ourselves. She also did inform us about how we can get support from Our Ladies Global. So despite not being given financial support, however, we could obtain financial support through the AR consortium. Next slide, please. Okay. So to organize the event, we started by firstly reaching out to the Our Ladies Global team, and this was through the email info@ourladies.org. Then we went into, again, the Our Ladies Global did provide us with the chapter credentials and other details such as the code of conduct, the email address, and the meetup page setup instructions that we can use. And then we then sent out a pre-launch survey that would help us understand the expectation of the Nairobi our community. Yeah, and also to know what was the major interest in our participants. And also we did ask our participants to rate their R skills so that we ensure that everyone has been catered for. We then did set launch dates, and lastly we advertised on social media, that is Twitter and LinkedIn, and this was the very first poster that was created. And if you are interested with more information, please look at the shared link below. Next slide, please. Okay, so then we did finally launch the chapter. We invited two speakers, that is Vebashini and Paloma. So Paloma is the organizer for Our Ladies Rotterdam, and Vebashini, sorry, I forgot to mention, is the organizer for Our Ladies Johannesburg. And in that particular event, we had 22 members join us. And in the event, we also spoke about we also spoke about briefly of the history of Our Ladies, which was founded on 1st October 2012 by Gabriela. And her aim was to give back to the society, empower women, and promote gender diversity in the art community. This led to the first meetup being held in San Francisco, California, in the US. We also informed the participants about the code of conduct we do follow, which is provided by Our Ladies Global, and this is to ensure that we have a harassment-free environment in all our social media spaces. And lastly, as we had presented the pre-launch survey, we showed the results that we found in that survey. And as you can see in this example here, we have the question on the aspect of work or everyday activity that you use or need R for. You see that data was quite bold. And also in the question of how frequently they would want the meetups to have, most participants suggested to have monthly meetups. Next slide, please. In this slide, I present the events we have had in 2020 and 2021, and we see we have a diversity of our speakers, and additionally we covered range of topics from data manipulation in our introduction to having our own Shelmith taking us through introduction to package development in R. And next slide, please. We also held collaborations with other chapters. So firstly, we had a collaboration with Nairobi R, where the topic of was working with databases in R. And also we had a collaboration with 4 other chapters in Africa: Our Ladies Tunis, Our Ladies Algeria, Our Ladies Abuja, and lastly Our Ladies Johannesburg, where the topic that was covered was networks and graphs in R for biology by Dr. Susan. Next slide, please.
So at this point, we had been organizing meetups without us physically meeting. So in March 2021, we met up for dinner, and this was the first time that 2 of us, that is Maggie and Joki, were actually meeting for the first time after several months of communicating virtually. We also teamed up with Nairobi R to have the first R-related conference in the city, which was Saturday, Nairobi 2021, and it was held on 4th of September. We had talks that ranged from junior level to advanced levels, and all these talks can be viewed in either the Our Ladies Nairobi or the Nairobi R YouTube channel. Over to you, Njoki.
Okay, so for 2022, so far this year, we decided to have bi-monthly meetups. This is to give us ample time to look for speakers and also the ample time to organize the event overall. We also focused on talks, and this is because the last 2 years we focused on trainings. And so we thought that for this particular, if the past 4 events we've had, we decided to focus on talks. However, you can view our GitHub account to check all the learning resources that were shared in last year's trainings. Additionally, we held our very first Twitter space, and this was in Twitter as Twitter Space Hangouts, yes, our stats, Twitter Space Hangouts, and this was in collaboration with Our Ladies Cologne. So for the remaining part of the year, we look forward to collaborating with more art communities. And lastly but not least, we also aim to take a break, and we will be resuming till later this year. Next slide, please. So for this particular slide, we see the 4 events that you have had, and as you can see, they're quite light talks. And we know that a couple of months back, we had the 30-day chat challenge, and we had Dr. Nicola speak to us about how her experience in creating the charts, and also we learned an illustration of creating a flow chart. Next slide, please. Like in organizing any art community, we have faced some challenges. So firstly, the attendance rate is still low. So despite keeping up with the morale, it can be quite demoralizing when we have low numbers for the participants. And also planning a successful event can be exhausting, but as my fellow presenter has said, it is all worth it. Yes, so over to you, Shell.
Thanks, Njoki. So what keeps us going? 1, we respect each other's views and time. 2, we are a very organized lot. Each person knows their role and they carry out diligently. The 3rd one, communication is key. We plan all our meetups via WhatsApp. We have not had to have a call in a very long time. And organizing meetups can be very, very exhausting. So we try our best to take some time off and breathe. And we promised ourselves that we'll never forget why we came up with the chapter, even when things get tough along the way. The greatest lesson we've learned from organizing the chapter is the power of teamwork. Each one of us has a specific role when planning a meetup. Like one person looks for and communicates with speakers, another creates posters, another leads the session on the meetup day, and another handles Q&A. We are such an organized team, and we've been able to tackle small hiccups that we've experienced along the way together. It can be very difficult leading a chapter alone or with people who are not cooperating. So if you want to start a chapter in your city, you need to think about this. Njoki?
So thank you very much, meaning asante sana. As you can see here, that is the Swahili for thank you. And if you wish to contact us, please use any of the platform shared on the screen, and we'll be happy to respond to a message. If you're looking into speaking to us, please feel free to reach out to us. And we welcome any questions from the participant. And thank you, Stephen, for hosting us.
Yeah. Thanks, Lucy. Thanks, Shell. Thanks for that wonderful presentation. Personally, I think I have a few questions for you, but for the sake of our time, we'll come back to those questions in a bit later. Let's go to our last presentation for today. That will be taken by David Smith. David will be talking to us on easy R tutorials for dev containers. David, can you go ahead and share your screen?
We can't hear you, David.
David, I think we've lost you. We can't hear you here. So maybe I'll just give you a few minutes to sort that out. We're good on time. And I'll just probably go ahead and for our other presenters while you address your microphone. So maybe I'll go to the first presenter. I'll go to Guillaume. Guillaume, I think we still have one unanswered question for you. And Guillaume, yeah, I see you. So the question is from Matt Dupree, and he's asking, why do you think R has become popular within the pharmaceutical industry? Well, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I was about to answer, but happy to answer live. I think it's a combination of things. First of all, it's the fact that the graphs from R are very nice. Then another reason is also the fact that it's open source. So when someone publishes a paper, it's very likely that they're also going to be publishing an R package. So if you want to be up to speed when it comes to research, when it comes to innovation, it's more likely that it's going to be happening in R than in SAS. Now, this being said, in the pharmaceutical industry, R is getting more and more, but I think SAS is still going to be important. And there's basically, two different kinds of uses. If it's very exploratory, or if it's very much related to simulations, then it's very likely that you are going to be using R. Now, if it's related to regulatory work, and I thought it's evolving, but it is still very much going to be some SAS-related work. Yeah.
Hi, this is David, just checking if people can hear me now.
No, absolutely, David, we can hear you now. So thanks for that response, Guillaume. So we're going to hand over back to David now. David is going to take us through the next 15 minutes, and we're going to come back to the Q&A after that. Over to you, David.
All right, thanks so much, Stephen, and thank you for everybody for joining me today. My name's David Smith. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, where I advocate for the R community. And this talk today is for anybody who's ever tried to teach R or teach applications using R. You might have written and published a tutorial or a blog post, or perhaps you've developed perhaps a multi-day workshop where you stand in front of a class of participants and they'll interact using R code and R scripts that you develop. And in either case, however much you prepare ahead of time and make sure that everything works and you provide all the instructions that the participants might need to go through the tutorial or the workshop, you might get questions like, how do I install R? Even though you gave everybody the instructions about how to get everything set up, there's all those people that didn't read it ahead of time and need to spend a lot of time getting all the infrastructure set up before they can even begin the tutorial. And even once they do get that all set up, you might get people that say, hey, your code's giving me errors. You tested it and it works fine, but they might have an old version of R installed on their machine, or they don't have the necessary packages installed. And even if they do, they might have the wrong versions of those packages, and that's what's causing those errors. Or you might have situations where people are using a different operating system than you developed on. You might have a mix of different operating systems in the class. And so scripts that you wrote, perhaps path names, just don't work for some of the people in the class. And even when everything works, everything is set up right, all the scripts are working just fine, you might find people are getting strange errors like, out of memory errors, or just the scripts take too long to run, simply because the laptop that they're using isn't powerful enough to, say, fit the models that you've put into your particular workshop. So I've got a suggestion for how you can address all of these different problems using something called dev containers. I'll explain the details behind dev containers in just a minute, but first of all, let me give you an example of how this works using something called GitHub code spaces, which makes use of dev containers. Now, everything for the talk I'm giving today is available at this GitHub repository right here. The link is on the bottom of every slide, so don't worry if you miss it right now. Let me go back to the repository right there. So one of the things you can do with this repository, in addition to giving you all of the instructions I'm going to show you, it also includes a sample tutorial, which we can try to run. And if you have access to GitHub code spaces, all you need to do is click the code button here in the top right-hand corner and click Create Code Space on Main. Now, the first time you click that, it takes a few minutes to actually set up a brand new machine for you to use in the cloud through GitHub. It installs all the necessary R versions and packages that I've specified for this particular tutorial. And then once that's ready, it persists and is available for anybody for as long as they like. I've got one that's set up here and running already. This is what a code space looks like when it first starts up. And it looks very similar to Visual Studio Code, the editor. And in fact, this is just Visual Studio Code running directly in the browser. And I can browse through the files in this repository, which is linked to this code space, just as I would any other repository or file system. I can scroll to a particular file, which is a notebook file running the R scripts and instructions for my particular tutorial. This is a tutorial on doing regressions with the Tidy Models package, and I can interact with it directly in Visual Studio Code, just as I would any other notebook. So I can click on the run button there to run the code in that particular cell. It took about 4.4 seconds to run, and the code reads in a data set from a file and prints out the first 10 rows. Pretty standard R stuff. What's probably more interesting here is not what happened, but what didn't happen. Have a look up here where I am loading in a couple of R packages. I didn't get any error messages about that because I've configured the dev container behind this to automatically have the tidyverse and tidy models and a bunch of other packages available to the user when they run this notebook. So everything just works without any more thinking. If I scroll down further into this notebook, we can see a few other examples. For example, we're using a different package here, Summary Tools, to calculate some summary statistics on the columns of this real estate data set. It turns out there are a few outliers in this data set, which we can see if we do some graphics. And again, this just works. Everything is all set up to use the ggplot package here to have a look at some distributions of the prices and a box plot, where we can see that there are indeed some outliers. And then in this particular tutorial, it's designed so that the participant will use what they learned in the tutorial to add some code, in this case, to filter out the rows with price per unit less than 70. So I can just start typing here. As you can see, it's actually popped up the answer for me. I have GitHub Copilot installed on this machine. So AI is actually suggesting the answer. You might want to turn that off for your tutorial, so people need to figure it out for themselves. But just to save myself time, I can just click Tab. And it turns out that if I run that code to do the filtering and then check it in this snippet of code here, yeah, I did in fact get the right answer, or rather GitHub Copilot got the right answer in this particular case. By the way, this is using the Otter package, Berkeley, I believe, to automatically do tests within workshops. It's actually built on top of Python. So I actually need to have Python in the background running here. And again, that's something I've configured and set up within the dev container. So neither you nor the participants need to worry about anything like that. So that's running a dev container within GitHub code spaces. Let's have a look at a little bit more detail how that works. First of all, what is a dev container? You've probably heard about containers. If you haven't, you can think of it like a very lightweight virtual machine. And a dev container is just a container with some additional metadata and configuration designed for running and developing code, just as we saw right there. So you can put into the container things like Visual Studio Code, so people can do development, or the compilers, language engines, everything else that you need for the particular project or workshop that you're working on. Dev containers are 100% open source software. As we just saw, they're integrated with GitHub, which you can run directly from, you can launch directly from within a repository. There's also great integration with Visual Studio Code. We'll see that in a minute. And there's also a command line interface, a CLI, which allows developers of any application, like other IDEs rather, to incorporate GitHub code space, or incorporate dev containers into any other application. But the nice thing about using these dev containers is every user gets the same experience. They're in the same operating system with the same software, all available for them as you have determined is required for the particular tutorial or workshop that you're working on. If you want more general information about how to set up containers, you can go to the website containers.dev that you see on the screen right there. But I'll give you a few tips in this talk about how you can modify the dev container that I provided for this talk to your own ends as well. But once you've set up a dev container, you can run it as we just saw in GitHub Codespaces. That does require, to get access to GitHub Codespaces, either a GitHub Enterprise subscription or a GitHub Education subscription. So if you have access to either of those things, reach out to the administrator of your GitHub installation, and they can enable Codespaces for you. But even if you or your participants don't yet have access to GitHub Codespaces, you can also run dev containers locally. All you need is a machine that can run containers and software like Docker to actually do the running. And I'll show you how to do that in just a second. And I also want to mention, kind of as an aside, as dev containers aren't just for workshops and tutorials. Fundamentally, they are just containers. So they have applications in every place that containers do. They're really good for reproducibility. So as we saw in Ning Leng's talk just before this one, being able to reproduce code in a consistent environment is a great application of dev containers and containers. And there's a smooth transition from development into production. Perhaps you want to put that container into Azure Container Apps in Azure or Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud providers. And you can just strip down the dev container to make it ready for production by taking out things like the IDE. It's a real smooth transition. Anyway, let me show you how to run a dev container locally. I'm going to do that using Visual Studio Code running on my local machine, the same machine that I'm running this presentation on. I'm on a Windows machine, but I'm using Ubuntu. I prefer Linux myself, so I'm actually in the Windows subsystem for Linux, running a Ubuntu shell here. So all I need to do is cd into the repository that I've already downloaded from GitHub, and then launch the Visual Studio Code editor. So that's actually going to open it on the contents of that same repository we were looking at a minute ago. Let me make this window a little bit bigger so we can see. There we go. This is just all the contents of that same repository. I've got the whole devcontainer.json file open. This is the one that configures the dev container. We'll see more about that in a moment. It's living in a folder called .devcontainer, which is how you set up the repositories to have dev containers. And because VS Code has noticed that subdirectory, it's offered to me to reopen this file system in the container. And all that means is now that Visual Studio Code is running within the container. And so that when I use things like R or the shell within the container, I'm using all the software that I've configured into that container. So I get the right R version, all the packages are installed, and I'm now ready to use that same Jupyter Notebook within Visual Studio Code, as I did before on the web with GitHub, but now it's running directly on my local machine through Visual Studio Code. So same again, I can just browse into the file system, to the solution folder, open up the regression notebook, and it's the same deal as before. I can just choose individual components and then run each individual part as you would any other notebook. So you can see it's connecting to the R kernel directly here on my local machine, and I would load those two packages and do the same computations. So something you might notice is it's actually running a little bit slower. I'm not using a particularly high-powered laptop here, but it is using my own computation. So that's one advantage of doing it in the cloud through GitHub Codespaces, is you can get access to a much more powerful machine. It's a 32 gigabyte machine by default with lots of memory and high performance. So you don't need to worry about what kind of hardware the participants have on their laptops. But this will give the same results as it did when I was running it through GitHub Codespaces just a moment ago. All right. So just to give you some tips on configuring the Docker file or considering the dev container, the first file you want to have a look at it is the Docker file. That's the standard sort of setup file that you use for containers. One of the things I have there is the ability to configure the R version. The way I've got it set up is it just looks for the latest version 4. So it actually pulled out version, which was released just a couple of weeks ago. From the Rocker project. It's a really good containers project for the R ecosystem led by Dirk Ederbutel. Lots of different R versions available to you, and you can lock it down to a very specific version if that's what you need for your particular tutorial or reproducibility. And there's also some steps in there that install the packages that R is using, like DevTools and Tidyverse and about a dozen others that are required for this particular tutorial. There's one other file you might want to configure, and that's the devcontainer.json file. This is the one that primarily configures Visual Studio Code. For example, I've got it set up to use the Radeon terminal for R when I'm running it within the container. And it's also installing some packages, extensions rather, that I need for Visual Studio Code to support R editing and Jupyter Notebooks. It's a very quick summary, but you can have a look at more of the details on the repository. So just to conclude, if you want to teach folks R or R applications, do what you normally do. A workshop as a GitHub repository, include all the scripts, the data, the notebooks, the instructions that you want in that repository, but also include that .dev container folder, which configures the dev container. And you'll use those two files I just mentioned, the devcontainer.json file and the Docker file, to define the software environment that's going to support the code that you're using within the. And then for the participants, it's super easy. If they have access to GitHub Codespaces, they don't even need anything other than a browser installed on their laptops. They can just run it directly in GitHub with GitHub Codespaces, or they can run it on their local machines with just a little bit of configuration, as we saw with Visual Studio Code and the remote containers extension. Also, a quick plug, that particular workshop that I just showed you with doing regression with R and tidy models, that's actually from a big collection of workshops that's available for workshop library. There's about 30 different workshops there on the topics of AI, machine. There's also some web development stuff. There's some Python stuff. There's 3 R tutorials, as you can see on the screens there. They are all configured to work with dev containers and trainer videos to explain how to use them in educational settings at github.com/Microsoft/workshop library. So thank you for your attention today. I'm David Smith. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft and a director at the R Consortium. And you can find everything related to this talk today on GitHub at github.com/revodavid/devcontainers-r. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, for that presentation. We have a few questions for you already, so I think I'm just going to go ahead and take those now. The first question is coming from Jeremy. Jeremy is asking, is there a memory or file size limit to the GitHub code space for a free personal GitHub account?
That's the question that I think was related to the GitHub account. Right now, GitHub Codespaces is only available for enterprise and educational accounts. There was a wait list for a while for individuals to get access to it, so you may have access to GitHub Codespaces if you signed up for that. And it will be opening up again to individuals in the future, but stay tuned for news about that.
Excellent, thanks. The next question is also coming from Jeremy. He's asking, does GitHub Codespace support interactive plots like HTML widget outputs like Plotly Graph, DT, reactable tables, etc.?
I'm not entirely sure. I've never tried that myself. Certainly any of the interactive charts that you would pop up in a browser would work, because then that browser would pop up directly within the Codespaces environment. Whether they work embedded in sort of the Jupyter Notebooks and Visual Studio Code, I haven't tried, but it'll be tried out. And of course, another option too is you can install RStudio itself, in fact, RStudio server into and launch the RStudio server from there as well.
Right, great. So I think those are the questions we have for David right now. but we still have 10 more minutes, so I don't know if our participants have any more questions they would like to ask our speakers. So we can just go ahead and do that now. But I have two here for Lucy and Shell, so I'm going to just go ahead and ask that in the meantime. So, Lucy, while you were Shell, while you were making the presentation, you talked about low attendance. I think it's something we see relatively frequently on this part of the from this part of the world. So I don't know if you maybe your thoughts around why you think we're having that. Why do we have low turnout during talks, during meetups, especially when we're discussing around things like that? Uh, Maybe that's the first part. And what do you think we can do to maybe change that narrative? And my second question is now going to be I see that you mentioned that maybe the team wants to take a break a bit, and now we're having a meet up bi weekly and more or less like focusing on talks. I just want to ask maybe when we come back from the break, are there plans to have other initiatives included in what we do, activities that you might really want to tell us at this point? Yeah, over to you, Lucy and Ashok.
Okay, I'll pick the question on the low attendance. So yeah, since we haven't had any physical meetup, so it might be explained that at this point our participants might be exhausted with the virtual meetups and rather might be expecting for us to have in-person meetup. So that could improve the participants. But our reason for having virtual meetups is to ensure that it is quite inclusive. That is not only people located in Nairobi city, but other people located in other parts of Kenya and also the rest of the world could be able to join any of the talk and training we'll be having. But regarding the low attendance, we can say it depends on the topic that we cover, and it also depends on depending on the burnout. Yes, the virtual burnout, because you have to be quite attentive for you to be able to understand. Yes, also in person you have to be attentive, but this is quite, you have to be really careful while listening. And also there could be also challenges with, well, we're in Africa and electricity can just decide to disappear. And if you had planned to join an event, that will prevent you from joining. Yeah, Shell can add more.
For me, I would say it could also be as a result of the number of people who are actually getting paid jobs to work with R. I noticed even in Kenya, the number of companies that actually use R are not many. So people can really get exhausted attending an R meetup and kind of they're not seeing how this thing will help them get money at the end of the month. Because for me, when I started in 2016, around there in 2017, I was working with R. I was being paid to use R. And so I knew every time I attended a meetup, I will gain knowledge that will eventually help me. So if you're working with, let's say, Python or SAS or Excel, and that is what is paying your bills, when someone like Shelmith comes and tells you, oh, you should learn R, at the end of the day, you ask yourself, what for? Like, I'm not earning from this. But yeah, we are trying. I think especially with our ladies and just being social out there, we are telling people that you can learn this small thing and even get a remote job. You don't have to even work in Kenya. You can do amazing things effortlessly. You just attend our meetups, learn something small, and that will help. But snail space, I must admit, as compared to other chapters in other continents, it's been very gradual, but we hope one time we are going to reach that point. Like Rome was in a day, we are only in our second year. I can imagine how many attendees we'll be having by the time we're in the 10th year. Yeah. And sorry, I've forgotten in terms of us taking a break, I think right now the only thing that is in our head is taking a break. So maybe look for us in October, maybe we'll have plans, but right now we are going for holiday and then we are going to re-strategize. when we come back.
Excellent. Glad to hear that the team will also consider re-strategizing after the holiday. And I think you really do deserve the holiday. So please enjoy your holidays. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask. I think either Graham or Nick probably can respond to this. What I see is that there is a very wide acceptance of R within the pharmaceutical community. And I'm wondering, would this be because R is being taught in schools, farm scientists and the rest of them are introduced to art very early, or would you want to ascribe this to the leadership within the pharmaceutical industry that really giving our enabling environment to grow? Or would you say maybe it's as a result of competition, maybe one pharmaceutical industry is using and the other industries are probably looking towards buying in and that kind of competition? Because I'm really impressed with how the pharmaceutical industries are using R. And I think maybe you might want to share your thoughts on that. Guillaume, Ning, I
You
think
can go ahead.
Sure, yeah. I can go ahead. Yeah, so I think definitely we see a very, very strong interest in the pharmaceutical company, and within Roche Genentech, indeed we are trying to kind of enabling using R for regulatory reporting as well. So we are building our kind of next generation tools like R packages to do the regulatory filing stuff. Yeah, so we see people have the interest over there, and there are some hurdles of using open source software. It's kind of we need to be more careful when we use the open source software, the responsibility will be on the user side, more responsibility will be on the user side. So it's a culture shift over there. On the other side, I think by adopting R or other open source language, I think that also promote the kind of the open source mindset or the inner source mindset. So previously by using proprietary language, that people just focus on their own study and the collaboration may not be that much. But now if we all contribute to the same internal code base or external code base, actually there are more collaboration, more learning from each other. Yeah, so I see that this is also a big culture shift in pharma industry as well. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Would you want to add to that, Guillaume? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Ning. It probably has to do a lot with the collaboration. Probably has to do a lot also with the fact that so I answered it in the chat and I answered it earlier today as well. So the fact that if you want to stay up to speed when it comes to the research and when it comes to innovation, it's gonna go through R, because if you wait for the SaaS update, it's not going to be happening as quickly as someone releasing a package on the CRAN or on bioconductor. So I think it probably also relates to this. Now, as Ning said, I think there is still room for the two languages at the moment, and there's going to be quite some time before the whole industry shifts completely to R, and I don't think we're ready for the moment. So, I think we're living in these very nice times where it's going to be R and SaaS. And depending on what you're going to be doing, it's either going to be R or it's going to be SaaS. And I think it's very important to know the limitations of each. And as long as we know them, let's have fun and let's use the right tool, basically.
And it would be nice to have enabling multilingual. Who knows what comes next? Maybe Python, maybe Julia. It's good everybody knows multiple languages.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. I think at the top, we had over 120 participants joining this session. And thanks to all of our presenters. Thanks for doing justice to your talks, to the presentation. And we wish our participants and our speakers a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and do enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.